Hi, my name is Gary, and I'm a grateful compulsive overeater. I weigh and measure 3 meals a day from the gray sheet. I turn those over to a sponsor. I don't eat anything other than what I've committed, and abstinence is the most important thing in my life, without exception. And I probably have told this story at least once or twice before. I think I'm supposed to say what my date is. It's September the 12th, 1975. Okay, and what that means is that I've been abstinent longer than a number of people who I know in the rooms have been alive. Okay, and it is also something for which I am quite grateful. I did not come into this program because I thought I was going to be here 46 years later. Okay, I came in here kicking and screaming. I wanted there to be another solution. Okay, I had a reasonable idea of what this was all about before I walked in the door, and I didn't want it. Okay, and after my very first meeting, I knew I really, really didn't want it, because these people were holding hands. They were saying prayers. Okay, they were doing pretty much everything that I was absolutely opposed to doing. The one thing that they had that I didn't have, okay, was they looked, the majority of them looked really normal. Okay, and why was it that somebody who had all these things going for him, which I did have, okay, just couldn't deal with this obsession with food? And at that very first meeting I went to, okay, there were actually 2 speakers at that meeting. And one of them was celebrating a year, and the other one was that person's sponsor, who had at that time 3 years. And I remember, for me at that time in my life, this represented just a new diet. I came because I was completely out of control with food, wasn't at my top weight, but I was heading there very quickly, and I knew it. So I sat through that meeting, and there were some interesting things that they did at that meeting. One of them was they had all of our basic tools, okay? And someone actually explained it at the meeting. They said, here's a cup, here's a scale, here's a tablespoon, okay? And they went through the basics, okay, at the meeting. And I thought, that was interesting. My eating career had been ones where over the most recent period of time before I got abstinent, I became an absolute expert in weighing and measuring Gary. Okay, I knew, depending on what time of day it was, what day of the week it was, okay, how to manipulate. And I think that for me, and probably for a few other compulsive overeaters, is part of our disease. I was a master manipulator, and I was a manipulator of my weight. And when people would, heaven forbid, which they did do from time to time, comment on maybe it might not be a bad idea if I dropped a couple of pounds, okay, which of course made me absolutely angry. And how dare they say that? And typically that would happen after I'd been on a diet and maybe I'd lost 20 pounds. I probably still had another 50 or 60 to go. And then someone would say, gee, maybe you should lose a few. What's the matter with you? Don't you see how much greater I look? And one of the things that characterized my disease, and probably a few others, especially those of us who got to be morbidly obese, which I did, okay, I think one of the things that characterized it was whenever I asked, I always lied about my weight. If you're 100 pounds overweight and you shave 20 pounds off, very few people are really going to know. Okay. And that was what I would always do. I would always lie about it. Okay. Going to the doctor was a horror show because, okay, they didn't ask you what you weighed. They made you get on a scale. Okay. And, pretty much all of the people that I know in Gray Sheet follow a very similar protocol. one of the things I have said is most of us weigh ourselves, on the first of the month. I really believe that the Earth tilts about 1.5 degrees on its axis on the first of the month because of all the crazy GreySheeters who are getting on the scale first thing in the morning and weighing themselves. I am one of them. No question in my mind about it. And the other thing was, and even before I got abstinent, I would never get on a scale if I could help it with a stitch of clothing on. And I still don't. Okay. It is very important that I take my Fitbit off that weighs maybe, half an ounce or an ounce. Okay. I never bothered to weigh it. But, this somehow is really, really important. And this insane, and it really is, insane focus on my weight and my body were, for me at least, key elements of this disease. And I did not come in with the idea that I was going to be abstinent for the next 3 months, forget about years. I came in, I looked around the room, I saw people who had normal bodies, and I wanted that, okay? But I didn't want any of the rest of this program, okay? When they read the steps and the traditions, okay? I was pretty good with I'm powerless over food, okay? I wasn't so sure about the fact that my life was unmanageable. It was unmanageable without the food. I could go that far with it. And I didn't want to, I didn't want to change. I think that's a big part of this program is when I learned just how much I didn't know, okay, and I became willing to start to make changes, okay, then is when the program really started to kick in and it really started to make a difference. I believe that I have a 3-part disease. It's threefold. It's spiritual, it's physical, it's emotional, okay? And for me, the part that brought me in was the physical part. I would never have come into these rooms if they said, Gary, what you really need to do is you really need to get spiritual. And once you get really spiritual, okay, this obsession will be removed from you. And over the years, especially when we were all part of OA, there are a number of people who would say things to me like that. And I would say to them, if that works for you, that's great. It would never have worked for me. And there are lots of people that I know in these rooms for whom it wouldn't work. And when I would see somebody who was 100 pounds overweight, and they said, well, I'm working on my spirituality. And my answer, and I've been known to be pretty direct, was always something like, maybe you ought to think about putting down the food, okay? Because until I did that, and I'm trying to look at it for myself, until I put the food down, and I actually heard, I thought I was a real smart guy, and at that first meeting, I heard something that I'd never heard before. The idea that we are bodily different from other people, that I, for one at least, do not metabolize sugars and refined starches the way other people do. I think for me, they probably become alcohol almost instantaneously. Okay, but the idea, one of the things that they said at those early meetings that I went to is, tell me about how you were when you just had one. And when I went and thought about it, I could not remember a single time in my life when I ever had one. That was not a unit of measure that I dealt with. The unit of measure I dealt with was I would have a whole loaf, I would have a whole box, I would have and then what I would do is I would replace it. I remember my father used to love sweets, and he would buy this sweet that had the name of the manufacturer on each chunk. Okay, and I remember, he bought a huge one and put it into the cupboard. I remember going in there and I would say, well, I'll just have in the lower left-hand corner the H. Okay, and Half an hour later, there was one piece left from the upper right-hand corner, and it was the Y. Thank you, Adam. I did all of the things that we crazy compulsive overeaters do with food. I ate out of the garbage. I ate out of the, I ate the frozen carbs out of the freezer. I'd forgotten my spoon, so I just used my fingers. The fact that I didn't end up with frostbitten fingers is probably amazing. But the real thing is the gray sheet took care of the physical craving. As soon as I stopped eating the sugars and the carbohydrates, things just really changed. Okay, I lost a tremendous amount of weight in that first 30 days. And then I said, okay, I'll go for another 30 days. And over the course of really that first year that I was abstinent, and I really stayed abstinent because for more than, for whatever the reason, I'm big on ceremonies and graduations. So I thought it would be great to get my 1-year chip. Okay, so I stayed abstinent for that first year. I would say for probably the first 9 to 10 months at least, because I wanted that chip. And what happened was all of a sudden things started to get to me. I started to realize that, I'd lost the weight. I'd lost all the weight. It came off very, very fast. Okay, yes, I'd lost all the weight. Okay, I was on maintenance. Okay, I had never been this comfortable ever that I could remember in my life. And I was miserable because I'd only dealt with one part of my illness. I dealt with the physical part of it. And the other two parts of it took a lot longer. I went back into therapy. I'd been in therapy before. It was a waste of the doctor's time and my money, okay? Because it always came back to the fact that I was fat, and it came back to the food. And, at which point I would always find a reason to disengage. This time I went to therapy when I was abstinent. The food was not the issue, so I, heaven forbid, had to focus on what my real issues were. And I started to make some progress with that, amazingly. And the third part of this disease is the spiritual part. And that was the hardest, for me at least, that was the hardest part. I came into these rooms an avowed atheist. I thought that agnostics just didn't have the courage of their convictions. And we atheists knew what the truth was. There was no God. And I was a really arrogant person at the time. One of the things they used to say at the meetings, those early meetings I went to, was, you can have any concept of a higher power you want. If you want to, make it a doorknob. And I did. I used to say for the first few years, my higher power, the doorknob. Just looking to get in a fight with somebody about it. And fortunately, nobody wanted to fight with me about it. And somewhere along the line, probably around my third year of abstinence, I was talking one evening with my sponsor after I turned over my food. And I said to him, I'm having a really hard time with this spiritual part of this program. And he said to me, do you want to know why? And when somebody says that to you, it really makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because I know something is coming that I don't want to hear, but I ought to hear. So I reluctantly said yes. And he said, the problem, Gary, is that you're too busy playing God for there to be a higher power in your life. If I got to reach to the phone and strangle him, I would have made a good attempt at it. I couldn't, so I had to, I had to start thinking about it, and I knew he was right. And from that point on, I was able to develop a level of spirituality, knowing that I was not running the universe, I was not running the lives of all the people around me, and that the one person that I had to focus on was me. And that changed a whole lot for me. So with that, I'll close. Thank you. I am really grateful to be abstinent. And I'm grateful that I don't do this alone, that I have you guys with me. Thanks.